Awesome, technology is working. All right, so this is kind of the hot topic in tech at the moment, right? Cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin and all this, craziness that's going on, and decentralized applications and stuff like that. So what I wanted to show you today was, this really is the Wild West of the internet, right? This is like 1992 when the internet first, hit our shores, and nobody knew what it was, but a couple of people were playing with it. And anybody who told you that they knew what was going to happen was a downright liar, because nobody had any idea. And as far as I see it, this is exactly where we are now with this idea of trustless systems, which we've built with blockchain. So I'm the software design lead at Elabor8, and I also contribute to a project called Holochain, which I'll get to a bit later on. And that's really, really exciting for me. Quick agenda. Let's see what is Bitcoin, what is blockchain, what's mining, what's fork, what's all these crazy terms that you hear now, people bantering around like they know what's going to happen next year, right? Nobody has any idea. And then there are some problems with these things as well, as we've all heard about scalability issues and all this kind of stuff. So we'll have a look into those things as well. All right, anybody tell me what the word fiat actually means? Fix it again, Tony. Yeah, good one. No, it actually means breathed into life, right? Which so when people say it's a fiat currency, therefore it's a real currency, rubbish. The RBA just goes, here's $1, right? And the reason that you believe it's $1 is because the RBA gave it to you, right? Bitcoin is essentially a fiat currency because we just made it. The only difference is we don't have a bank to tell you that it's worth $1. We trust through this trustless system that it's actually worth something. Any idea how Bitcoin is actually produced? All right, we'll get into that. But essentially, it's a lottery, and we have these massive mining magnates that are trying to make these a hash key with 5 zeros at the beginning. So, and we'll get into that in a little while. The market capitalization for just the top 5 cryptocurrencies at the moment is over $250 billion, right? This is not pocket money anymore. This is real cash, and lots of people are getting involved. And any idea what a wallet is? Everybody heard of a wallet? Basically, it's a piece of software on your machine that gives you a unique address that people can give you cryptocurrencies, and you store them. And lots of people lose their money because they lose their keys and it can't be recovered, and there's all these really fun stuff going on. So for newbies, there's quite a lot of money goes missing. And you buy into this whole crypto madness by going through an exchange. So in Australia, we have CoinSpot and CoinTree, and you have to go through your Know Your Customer things. It takes a couple of days. You have to register your bank accounts and smile into the camera with your identification and all this kind of cool stuff, which is good because that adds a level of legitimacy to the whole thing. Because people are still thinking that Bitcoin is for buying drugs off Silk Road, right? And the funny thing about that is that when Silk Road was shut down, the trade volume in Bitcoin didn't change at all, right? So the amount that was actually being used on the black market, pretty small. If you're really interested in the black market, there's 2 currencies. One's called Monero and the other one's called Particle, and they're really good for being anonymous. And what's an ICO? Everyone's going, oh, ICO, crazy, hundreds of millions of dollars being raised, right? Basically, it's the same as IPO, except there's no regulation. And it's called initial coin offering. Now what that does is companies who have a good idea, such as Power Ledger, which is a company started out of Curtin University in Perth, they've actually built suburbs with interconnected solar systems. So they have a peer-to-peer token-based solar trading system, so you can buy solar directly off your neighbours. You don't have to go through a retailer, so they can sell it for a higher price and you can buy it for a lower price. Everybody's happy. Which is why the Power Ledger ICO came out at 8 cents. That was last week. It's now worth 52 cents. So if you dumped a couple of grand in there, you'd be cashed up. Very nice. All right, so underpinning all of this madness is this idea of a blockchain. And it is literally a chain of blocks, right? And inside that block is a list of transactions that have happened. And it's what people refer to as the global ledger. Now, the ledger is essentially an accountant's book. You go to an accountant and they say, like, here, take $5 out of my account and put it into this account. That's exactly what it is. But the interesting thing about that is that if you have a look at this network diagram here, you can imagine that when I make a transaction and I'm down in the bottom left corner, those 3 nodes closest to me, they're the ones that are going to get the transaction record first. And the node at the farthest distance, which may not be distance, it's just time-wise because it's all lightning fast electric speed, they will get the same list of transactions in a slightly different order. Now just keep that in mind. I'll discuss why that's important later. The really fun thing about all this, right? Bitcoin is literally just one application that's been built on the blockchain technology. It's the first one, it's the biggest one, it's the one that people know about. And if you mention Bitcoin at dinner now, somebody there will probably know what you're talking about. But it's the trustless-based system that has been built underneath, right? We don't need to trust a third party anymore. You don't need to trust a bank to make this transaction because we're trusting the fact that the lovely NSA built us this awesome hashing algorithm, which means that if you change 1 bit on any of that data, the hash is different. And then you can prove that, oh, you've modified that data. I don't trust you. Let's go on with other people, right? We'll get to that in a minute as well. All right, so we have these things called miners. Everybody heard of a Bitcoin mining farms? All right, it's crazy what's going on. Literally madness. So the way it works is you have that list of transactions, and we have the last list of transactions, so the last block that was committed to the blockchain, and we have our new block of transactions. And when you combine those 2 pieces of data together and you run the hash algorithm against it, you get a hash. Great fun. And if you do it again and again and again, you will get the same hash with exactly the same thing. But what the miners are looking for, and this is how a Bitcoin is produced and how people get reward, is they introduce this thing called a nonce. Basically, it's just a random number, right? So you've got your last block, current block, nonce, and when you combine the 3 of them together, you'll get a different hash key. And if you keep changing that nonce, you will keep getting a different hash key, even though these 2 things have changed, right? Are the same. And what the miners are looking for is a hash key that starts with 5 zeros. Now, these hash keys are like this long, right? All characters, hundreds, can be 50, 60 characters in them. And then you try to get 5 zeros at the beginning. You've got to do that lots and 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 lots of times, right? To find 5 zeros. So you used to be able to do that on your computer. I remember when Bitcoin first came out, you could mine it on your computer. Occasionally you'd win and you get a couple of Bitcoins. It used to be hundreds. You get like 500 Bitcoins for coming up with for the key. Because once that key is found, that new block of transactions is committed to the blockchain. That becomes the new block for the next line. Chaining along, right? None of that past chain can be changed in any way, shape or form because it will upset the hash keys and everybody will know that you've been trying to tamper with the records. So you used to be able to do it on your computer. Became too slow. So people started doing it on their GPUs, which was faster. And then you could win a Bitcoin. More people get involved. Oh, cool, I can make Bitcoin. What's it worth? 12 cents. Awesome, I'll make some, right? Just for fun, which is why you have all these billionaire teenagers now, right? It's too slow now. Now they have this thing called an application-specific integrated circuit. It's essentially the hash algorithm stamped into silicon, made into a chip, this big, right? The new ones will do 14 terahashes per second. Right? That's 14,000 billion hash calculations per second. And it takes them 10 minutes to come up with a hash key. So just calculate how many that is. I can't even calculate that. It's crazy. It takes a lot of electricity to do all that calculations, right? At the moment, they reckon it's more than the total power consumption of Ecuador. And the problem with all this is that you end up with the Pareto effect. The Pareto effect is the 80-20 rule, right? Whereas 20% of the people get 80% of the effect, 80% of the reward, which is what's happening. Because the mining is now controlled by a bunch of huge miners. Because if you've got cheap electricity and a cheap way to make these chips, you can get Bitcoins. And at the moment, you get 25 Bitcoins every time you win, which in Australian dollars is $275,000, right? Every 10 minutes. Not a bad business model, if you ask me. How big do you reckon these mining farms are? Okay, this is a Chinese guy called Jihan Wu. Right? He's literally the biggest whale in this whole Bitcoin thing. Right? It's madness. Those 7 sheds are about 150 meters long as well, by the way, and they are literally packed floor to ceiling with those little chips that he makes. And right next door to it, you can't see it, is a hydroelectric dam. He's pretty much got free power. He's pretty much got free manufacturing of chips. So this guy's making an absolute bundle, right? Which is the 80-20 rule. You know, we can't win this game now. It's not possible to mine and make any money out of Bitcoin. All right, better speed up a bit. All right, so if you've got every single transaction that's ever been done in your currency forever and ever and ever, it's going to get bigger and bigger, right? So last month when I started this presentation, it was 138 megabytes. Today it's 142. So it's growing a little bit faster. And not many people are using Bitcoin yet, right? So think of escalation as things start getting bigger. And you have to download that to sync and all that kind of stuff. So to be an active node is quite complicated. All right, so now we've got Bitcoin under control. Everybody got a rough idea how it works, right? Lots and lots of investment. But what if you don't like the way Bitcoin works? It's too slow. Or I want to do faster transactions. Or I've got a better way to do this. Or I want to do segregated witness. Or I want to do X, right? Imagine 2 accountants been working in the same accounting firm for 10 years. Been doing the same thing over and over again, right? Pretty happy with the way things works. Paul, the accountant, goes to an agile training course and comes back with a great new way to do stuff, right? But I disagree, because I want to do it the same way, because it works. Why would I change that? And we argue and argue, and eventually Paul goes, you know what, I'm going to go and start my own company. So he takes the whole ledger, every single transaction that's ever happened, and I keep the ledger as well. I'm called Bitcoin, and he's called Bitcoin Cash now, right? It's a whole new... What happened was, everybody who had Bitcoin at that moment in time now has the same number in Bitcoin Cash. And then me, or Paul being the big investor in Bitcoin Cash, goes and pumps Bitcoin Cash, lots of marketing, tries to get new people involved, all this kind of stuff, right? Value of Bitcoin Cash goes up, everybody's happy, try to take over. But as with normal forks on open source software, which I spent 15 years building a big open source CMS, and I watched this happen over and over again, the forks have these great ideas, but they rarely get the momentum to keep going and stay alive or do something particularly awesome, right? Hence, Bitcoin Cash crashed. It's down to like $100 now, and a Bitcoin's $11,000. But because it's open source, this stuff happens all the time. This has actually happened about 1,500 times so far, right? So if we go back to that first, my first slide, see all these, Ethereum, Bitcoin Cash, Ripple, Litecoin, right? These are all essentially forks of Bitcoin. So it's going to happen over and over again as people come up with new ideas, faster transactions, and so there's all these great things going on now. So now you've got there's a product called 10x, which is a coin. They've also signed a deal with Wirecard, so they now can give you a credit card, and you can go onto the 10x site and go, cool, with my credit card today, I'm going to spend my Litecoin because Litecoins jumped 30% yesterday, right? So it's worth more. You can literally go and buy a coffee, tap your card like a credit card, and it will take Litecoin out of your account. So all these people going, oh, Bitcoin's got no value, right? It is. It's a useful tool now. There's another one called Go, where they're trying to get all the large population of Asia doesn't have a bank account. Right? And there's no infrastructure to do it. With this kind of technology, you don't need infrastructure, right? Everybody's got a mobile phone these days, and that's all you need. So forks have good and bad sides. So like I said, Bitcoin is just one application, right? Application of token currencies. So a really smart dude called Vitalik Buterin came up with this idea of Ethereum. And Ethereum is essentially what he calls the world computer, because you've got all these nodes, right? Which is essentially a computer, running this software, and it's immutable, right? If you put something into the blockchain, it cannot be changed without people knowing that you changed it, right? So imagine if you had rules in there, like the rules that govern your business, or the rules that govern your local council, or your government. It can't be changed, which means it can't be coerced, which means that your chances of corruption are pretty low. Because if you take people out of the equation, Computers don't care. You can't bribe them with a bottle of wine, right? So they come up with this idea of smart contracts. And there's a whole language written around it. And you can essentially write some code, commit it to the Ethereum blockchain, and it will do things like, in a simple case, like Joe's going to come and mow my lawn. So when Joe proves that he's mowed the lawn, I will release the $20 into his account. And that's a smart contract. And of course, you start building these things and think, oh, what else can we do on there? So there's quite a few applications building on it. And there's this idea of decentralized autonomous organizations, whereas if you code in all the rules, if you look at any organization or council or government, it's literally a set of bylaws, right? You could program that in, and then those things would just happen. Like, I want to change the fence height at my house. I don't have to wait for somebody to get to their email to go out and measure it and go, it's 1.8 meters high. I could just go, yeah, it's 1.8 meters high, here's the plans. The DAO goes, yeah, cool, approved, done, right? Don't need people anymore, which is awesome. And who do you think's really interested in all this? All right, financial sector, massively. FinTech are quaking in their boots. I had to correct myself then. I went to a Ethereum meetup a couple of weeks ago, and the head of innovation from Commonwealth Bank was there. And she said over the last 3 years, they've built 25 proof of concepts on various different types of blockchain, trying to come up with a way that they can use it to help the bank. They also had a commercial banker from Singapore there as well. And he was talking about the way that the transfer of funds can happen so quickly, you can reduce the amount of liquidity that the bank needs to keep in its bank, which costs less, right? So they can reduce their costs of overall, which means they can make more money. Yeah, so the applications of this stuff are really cool. It's quite scary. I mean, when you transfer money internationally, you'll heard of the SWIFT system. Any idea when that was invented?
Early 70s?
1973. Thank you very much. It's exactly the same system now, which is why money takes 12 days to get to Ireland, right? It's ridiculous. And there's lots of people involved who key stuff in and make mistakes, or they just, you know. So this has got massive applications. So, but imagine this, right? You've got the Ethereum blockchain. Every single developer who's building Ethereum smart contracts commits their contracts to the same blockchain and their data to the blockchain. Every single developer. And you have to download pretty much the whole thing to be a developer. Right? That's lots, right? Have a look at this. Oh, hang on. Let's get to how you do it first. It's a little bit tricky, right? You've got to install the Ethereum CLI, then you have to sync it. So you have to sync the whole blockchain down. Takes a while, because it's like 400 and something megs at the moment. Takes a little while. Then you write your contract. The nice thing I like about writing a contract is I use JavaScript. It's my favorite language at the moment. Then you have to do really cool things like format your contract by removing all the line breaks so it fits into a string variable. Yay fun, right? And then you have to compile it. And then you get the compiled code and you put it into another file, and then you load it up and you have to mine it on the blockchain. So you have to commit it, wait till it's mined, then you get a hash key, then you got to go and unlock your account so that you can supply gas to your account, which is the money that you pay to host it. And then once it's run, then you can run it. Right? It's quite complicated. And I've been a programmer for 25 years, right? And I did the tutorials and it did my head in. Right? So you can imagine there's some issues with that. Right? The size of the blockchain is crazy. It's 400 megs now. And there's things called gas limits, right? If you run out of gas, then you know your contract won't execute. It's quite costly to do these executions. You literally, like sorting a list of 100 entries can cost you quite a bit of money. And you have to wait for the mining to happen. Right? So you've got to wait for miners to do stuff before your transactions can happen. And they've got issues with scaling. So it's very difficult to fix a mistake, right? Because it's immutable. Because it's stuck there forever and you can't change it. So imagine when somebody accidentally locked up $300 million worth of Ether a little while ago. Because they found a little bug in the multi-signature parity wallet. It was so bad that the Ethereum developers decided that they would kill that branch, kill that whole stack, fork it, and make this thing called Ethereum, and call the old one Ethereum Classic, because some people wanted to keep going with it, and that's fine. With open source, you can do that. So now there's Ethereum and Ethereum Classic. And when it happens again, there'll be Ethereum and Ethereum mistake number 2. You know, and it's just going to keep going. Programming the smart contracts is difficult. It's difficult to test. There are some tools coming out now called Truffle, which makes it easier, but it's still complicated. And everybody's programs are all in the same thing, right? So you can see the size difference. So have a look at this. The blockchain on October 23rd was 350 gigabytes. Now, as a user of an Ethereum program, you don't have to download the whole thing. They have this idea of what they call a fast sync, which downloads about 12%. So what's that? 12% of that is 60 gigs, right? It's still going to take a little while. Not going to work too well on your phone either, by the way. Today, 410 gigs. So it's gone up 60 gigabytes in a month. Now, the interesting thing about that is that there's only just over 10 million people using it. All right? So imagine when this starts getting some mass adoption and we're talking about 500 million. You can see where the scalability issues are coming from and why there's all these talks of forking and how we're going to do this. There's this thing called the plasma network and the lightning system and all this stuff that they're trying to do to build into the code to make it work faster and scale. But remember I said the transactions get to different nodes at different times, right? Now remember that, because that means they think that there's this thing called universal time. Time's relative, you know? We've known that for hundreds of years. No, when was Einstein? Can't remember, 40s, 100 years, right? We've known that time's relative. So things that are in a different order. Very interesting for what I'm about to show you with Holochain. Well, not yet, but we'll get there. All right. So I tried to do all this. So I got all excited about Ethereum and I tried to write some programs and I was just like banging my head against the wall going, there's so many problems with this idea that I couldn't actually commit much time to it because I was just like, this is not going to go anywhere. And then a friend of mine put me onto this project called the Scepter project. And the part of that is this thing called Holochain, where it's not blockchain, all right? So that's why it's think outside the blocks. Holochain is a different way of doing things. Same fundamental idea of a trustless system with committed chains of data, but it's stored differently and it works differently. So it's currently in alpha. I've been working with this team for about 7 months, reading all the white papers, trying to talk to the guys that invented it because literally it melts my brain because it's really, really, like it's super, super fun. Right? Which is awesome when you ride your bike to work and you think, wow, most people can't tie their shoelaces, and then you come and talk to these guys and it's just like, wow, it's cool. So the difference is, instead of committing to a single block or a single chain, you have this idea of distributed hash tables. Who's all watched Game of Thrones and downloaded it and stolen it off the internet, right? Uses a system called BitTorrent. BitTorrent is a distributed hash table. The one we're using is a type called Camellia, and literally what it does is you have a bit of data here, and 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 you pull it down, and the distributed hash table puts it all back together, and you have your nice piece of data, which means not everybody has to store the whole thing, because it doesn't make sense to store the whole thing. Because if I'm tweeting with you, right, we're working on this thing, nobody else needs to validate that that's all correct. But the social apps that they're building on Ethereum, everybody has to come to consensus, which is not really consensus. What it means is some miner won the lottery about those tweets, which doesn't make sense, does it? All right. So Holochain is just part of an overall bigger concept called Scepter, which hopefully I'll be able to understand and talk about later in a few months, because this is easy stuff compared to that. Now, Holochain is actually peer-to-peer, right? It works that the data is sharded across all the different nodes, and it's got this cool, Camellia has this really cool algorithm of working out where it should put the data for the fastest way for you to get the data back together. There's no centralized server at all, and there's no ledger. And there's not this idea of users, miners, right? There's no different classes of users. There's no Pareto effect because we don't do any mining. Right? You don't have to mine to get a key to prove that it's all happened, which means that there's no arms race, right? Because the 14 terahash a second one, that's 6 weeks old now, right? And that's old hat. You can buy that now, right? Which means that Jihan Wu is probably up to 25, right? And you'll never win. but he doesn't tell you that. And it is actually properly decentralized. There's no bottleneck. We don't have to wait for a miner to find this hash key to commit the stuff to the chain so that everybody can validate that it's correct. We do our own, you validate as you put it into your personal chain, and then other people that are part of your neighborhood that you want to communicate with, they can validate that it's the same thing and everybody's happy. We actually had 100 apps running on a Raspberry Pi plugged into the wall. Right? Thank you. Wow, exactly. You try doing that with Ethereum, can't do it. Right. How far are we? Right, so how does it work? Think about nature, right? Works pretty well, doesn't it? In your body, is there a central controlling cell that tells all your other cells how to work? No, right? Every single cell has its own DNA, and based on the signals that it gets, it develops into different things. Stem cells, right? Turn into anything. So Scepter, as the overall project, has adopted this as a way of explaining how things are going to work. And the Holochain is part of this, which is why parts of the app are called DNA and zomes and things like that. And we call it biomimicry. It's a nice name. Now, it's agent-centric rather than data-centric. Now, remember we were talking about before in the network that your transactions get to the different nodes at different times, so they'll be in slightly different orders. But whoever wins, that now becomes truth. Everybody else is telling a lie because this is the truth, right? That relies on the fact that there's this thing called universal time, that time is the same for every single point on the planet, right? Which is not true because it's all relative as to when things get there. And it also, the problem with blockchain is it relies on this idea that data is a real thing, right? But it's not. It's relative. It's like, because things come to you in different orders, the way that you perceive things is different to other people. And that's why we call this agent-centric. Because what we do is we commit to our local chain and then give it out to the DHT, or the distributed hash table, and then that can figure it out with gossip. You don't need the idea of data being, universal time or data having this life of its own. And we don't have any wasted electricity. We don't have any wasted work done. You don't have to mine to get this to work, right? It just runs on your normal CPU, which is why you can run it on a Raspberry Pi. Which means, because there's no miners, there's no Pareto effect. You know, you don't have these big people coming in with millions of dollars and taking over. It's literally a sovereign, accountable commons. So everybody can contribute. And the whole point of this whole project is to get social cohesion happening and people involved in their applications rather than being used by their applications. So we have this idea of shared data integrity. So using the same hashing algorithm, I can commit my tweet to my local chain, it gets shared out, and then the person I'm tweeting with can run the same algorithm on it and go, right, cool, I trust that that's the same thing. Because you can't change it, right? It's been proven. And it's massive scale, like I said, 100 apps, not hard to do. And so a Holochain application has three things. Whereas with, so what you have is this idea of a DHT, and you have your source hash chain. So the one on the right, the first entry down here is the code, so that you can check to make sure that nobody's updated the code and was going to make things change, so you can hash that. Then the second one is your ID, like who you actually are, so you get a hash key as well. And then whatever data structure you want to put in there. Gets shared out to the DHT. The DHT code decides which nodes it should be shared on and where it should be stored, and your application just uses that. So it's nice, and the thing I really like about it is it actually works like a microservices event-driven architecture, because each of the calls in the DNA is literally like a serverless function call. All right, so there's a bigger picture of the Holochain. So this is your local, what's called chain DB. So you write this locally. So every time I write a tweet, or we've got a Slack version called Clutter. Anybody know what a clutter is? It's a flock of cats, by the way. So we don't have tweets, we have meows. Right? So each time we do a meow, that goes in as a data structure, which is validated. And then whoever else is I'm talking to, they can validate when it comes to their DHT that it's exactly the same and hasn't been messed with. All right, I just want to show you. This is Art Brock, right? Smartest person I've ever met. I'm wondering if we can get some volume here.
So Holochain has a bunch of advantages. For one thing, there's no bottlenecks at all because you are writing directly to your own local source chain and sharing to a distributed hash table, which is an eventual consistent approach. So there's no bottlenecks in being able to
On volume.
share the information. The other thing is really that there's two.
Hang on. How do we turn the volume up?
Yeah.
Is there another button?
Buttons on the side.
Yeah, turn it right up.
I'm on it.
Cool.
You need to put this in yours.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It doesn't come out through the...
No. I need to.
Oh, that's good one.
No, it's on Apple TV. I thought the Apple TV thing would just work.
No.
No.
Sorry.
That's all right.
It's only going to come out of the left speaker.
You can't turn on subtitles. Can
Yeah, it's got subtitles on it.
Can
you?
you?
Mine has.
Yeah.
You're going to have to put it down
It does actually probably right. You can sort of hear it.
Let's hope this works, eh?
Core underlying technologies that most distributed computing technologies are built on.
Yeah. Line of sight.
What's happened to the volume?
Stay here because you put down on the subtitles the volume.
Possible and desirable. And so you have blockchain as a strategy to solve these problems, to manage some universal list of tokens in some universal sequence. And they pretend they manage consensus about this, but what they basically do is have a lottery to have a particular vantage point, a particular viewpoint win. It's not really, the word consensus really isn't connected to any human use of the word consensus. And it takes massive processing power, and then their strategies for randomizing who gets to commit the next block take even more processing power and electricity. And so what happens in Holochain is that you can build private applications, manage who participates, be able to have them scale to the size of Twitter or Facebook, like massive scale, which things just on blockchain can't operate that way yet, and probably never will.
Cool. All right, so Art and Eric and a couple of other guys are currently touring around Europe doing hackathons on blockchain, and on Holochain. Don't tell him I said that. And to get developers involved to try and smash it and see if we can, do some really fun stuff with it. All right, so I showed you how to do it on Ethereum. It's a little bit easier on Holochain. You still need to be, know what you're doing, but they've set it up so there's actually a Cloud9 instance. You can just go there and clone it, and you don't have to do any of this stuff, and you can just start hacking, which is really cool. It's written in Go, so you just do go get, pull it down, run make. Then you initialize a holochain for yourself. And then you can do this really cool thing called clone, and you can pull down an existing application, which the one here is called Clutter, and that's our Slack channel. And then you can start editing it in JavaScript. The nice thing about that is that because it's in JavaScript, web developers can get involved really quickly. It's quite simple the way it works. And then you just run it, HCDev, away you go. So because you don't have to commit to the blockchain and wait for it to be mined and check the thing, you can do it all local. And I know there's an Ethereum testnet, right? But you have to bribe somebody to get you test Ether and all this kind of stuff, and it can take forever. So, but this way you can get involved by yourself and do it all. And the really nice thing is I go around in my daily job as an engineering effectiveness proponent, explaining to people microservices and why they're so cool, right? The way this works is literally microservices, and it's really nice. Not only that, you can have multiple applications or multiple DNA and have one application on top, just calling those different services as you would do with a microservices architecture. So it's kind of cool. All right. So there's a little example here of what happens. So the first time you use the application, it'll actually get the code from your DNA and it'll commit it into the chain and run a hash against it so that other people know that the code hasn't been changed when they go to use it. And then when I write a post, it'll show up in my local chain, and then it'll get shared to this DHT, and then it uses this well-known protocol called Gossip amongst the Cadmelia DHT nodes, and Gossip and Cadmelia will figure out which nodes to store the data on, so that the fastest way of getting the data back. So if you've ever, there's a product on Ethereum called a cacher, and they've done a similar thing, but it takes forever. And I always thought it was broken, but it was just, because it was so slow, I couldn't figure out what was going on, whereas this is quite quick. So then what happens is that the Gossip protocol checks to make sure that each person who's involved in the chat can go and get the right bits of data. So then their content is validated to show it hasn't been tampered with, and then the app pulls that up, puts it into the UI, and it's pretty easy to use. Actually, we've been using one called Mattermost, which is a open source version of Slack, and we're about to drop that and start using our own soon as well. So as you can see, it's pretty new. I've got a bunch of resources here for you. So you can imagine that trying to get people to install a Go application on their local machines and stuff like that, Joe Public isn't going to be able to do that. So to get around that, we've got this idea of, we've got these little hosting boxes called Holo Hosts, and you can take them home and plug them into your router, and then you effectively become part of this Holochain peer-to-peer network. So then you can host other people's applications, and then so you effectively get this peer-to-peer by proxy. And then the idea of that is that over the next few years, as the idea of peer-to-peer stuff becomes a lot more accessible and we make the installation process easier and all that kind of thing, these Holo host boxes will go away. We've got a really good plan for the next few years of what's going to be built. There's a whole load of apps and things on GitHub. Again, this is all open source and everyone's free to come along and have a look at it and help us build it. And there was actually a Q&A done about 2 or 3 hours ago. So that link there at the bottom there is a video of Matthew Shute doing Q&A live. And so just for the Holo hosting, how it works, right? You get this pre-configured box, or you can just install it on your own machine if you know what you're doing. And then that just runs in the background, and using whatever resources you're not using, it'll host apps. So you become part of that network in the node. And then by hosting these applications, people can literally just come along and type in like a browser address. So they don't have to install anything, they can just run it in a browser, which means that we'll get this peer-to-peer effect without having to have this big hurdle of installing applications and things like that. And the nice thing about that is it works really well on a browser, on your mobile, so it works on tablet, all that kind of stuff. So it's pretty cool. And if you're a mad, crazy person like me, you might want to do this. I actually set up a self-managed super fund with a group of friends, and we just rolled over 20% of our super into it. And the idea is that we're just going to buy Bitcoin every month on a regular basis. And this is a high-risk, short-term, high-return investment, right? I only advise you to do this with some money that you can throw away, because just in case it all blows up in our face. But so far, in the last 6 weeks, I've made like 40% on my investment. So like, you can't do that anywhere else at this point, right? So this is, just do it with money that you can do without. But it's a cool way to get hold of a bunch of money, chuck it in there, hold on to it for a couple of years. We're thinking, by the end of 2019, we're probably going to have reached the end of our nerves and pull the money out. But some of the predictions that you see are quite accurate, actually, of what's been happening. People were saying at the end of last year that by the end of this year, it'd be $8,000 US on the money. It's 8,000 US at the moment. They're saying by the end of next year, it's going to be 50. Right? And by the year after that, year after that, over 100. So I'm not a financial advisor, all right? Like I said, I'm mad, all right? So I put a whole bunch of money in here with a bunch of friends. And if you want to know how to do it, just give me a call. I've got somebody who can set it up for you. There's other mad people in the room who've already done it too. But yeah, come and ask me about that. So that's my take on the mad world of cryptocurrencies and blockchains and all that kind of stuff. It's really, it's crazy. It's the Wild West. Like, people are literally getting shot doing this, right? People are getting put in jail because there's literally no regulation, right? The whole thing about self-managed super funds, the ATO just basically went, we don't know what to do. Yeah, sure, go have a crack. They don't know what to do with it yet because they can't decide if it's a liquid asset or a non-liquid asset or a cash or foreign investment. They've got no idea. So because it's none of those things, right? So there's no way to regulate it yet, which is why, you know, people are going to jail for money laundering and all sorts of crazy stuff. So if you do this, make sure you do it through an Australian exchange so you're protected. Any questions? Yes.
What got you initially interested?
What got me initially interested? Okay, at core, I'm an anarchist. Right? I can't stand hierarchy. I can't stand politicians. I can't stand the cops. Everyone, just like all these people who have power for no reason. Right? Hierarchies don't work. Right? Some of the best civilizations in the world were egalitarian, and everybody was happy and everybody was fruitful. Right? In our organization, Elabor8. in our society, right? It's a suction mechanism, right? The higher up the suction mechanism you are, the more money you make and the happier your life is, right? Which is a load of shit. You just buy stuff, right? And that's go to work. Why'd you go to work? So I could buy stuff. Why'd you buy that? I didn't need it, right? So this is a way to, which is the trustless idea, right? And I love stirring people up, right? We don't need banks soon. Literally, banks are quaking in their boots, right? We're not going to need government soon, right? Direct democracy is coming, right? You know, the yes vote for marriage equality just recently, right? Shows that people can actually get together and work together, right? And stuff what the politicians say, you know? So they don't represent us anymore. All they represent is lobbyists and people with money, right? They don't represent me, they don't represent you. That's what got me into it, right? And then I discovered that there's all this stuff going on, and like some of the people involved in this are just planet minds. You know, it's amazing. It's really good fun. Anybody else? Yes.
So the way I understand it, Holochain is a fully different technological architecture that
Yes.
also sets up something like a distributed ledger, but then without having to replicate the ledger.
That's exactly right. Yep.
That could displace blockchain. So why are you on one hand championing a new technology, whilst at the same time putting investment in what it's supposed to displace?
Because I'm a hypocrite. No, because, yeah, so what's going to happen is, right, Holochain is awesome for distributed applications, decentralized applications, sorry. And so as an alternative to Ethereum, it's a no-brainer for me. Like, you can actually, and it's really fun to work with this stuff, right? It's actually, as a developer, it's interesting, it works, and the team that we're working with is really cool, and the technology is really clever, right? And it uses something that we've been using for, since the 90s, like the whole BitTorrent DHT idea, right? It works really well. So, but I'm investing in Bitcoins and cryptocurrencies because for the next few years, that's just going to be like, if you don't, right, you're going to be one of these people who goes, oh, I wish I thought of Google, right? That's why, right? Because I want to make some quick cash, exploit, the whole thing that's going on, whilst in the meantime building what I think is going to be the future of the internet. Good question, that.
With regard to investment, how do you make decisions around what coins to invest in? Just because, at the moment, the whole market's been bombarded by all these different coins and people selling
Yes.
with the team and stuff, but...
Right, so the question is, how do you decide which ICOs to get involved with and which cryptocurrencies, right? All right, so first thing, you need to be able to read a white paper and understand what they're doing If they're not publishing their code somewhere like GitHub or Bitbucket, no. If there's spelling mistakes and it's not a peer-reviewed white paper, no. All right. If it's cut and paste from another white paper, no. If it's in Chinese, really check it with somebody that can read Chinese, because a lot of them are Chinese. And I can't invest in those because I can't read it, but I don't have any Chinese friends who read it for me. But it is a matter of, you literally choose between sleep or investing in cryptos. Because the amount of info that comes out and the things that are going on, like the fork thing, right? Let's do a little story about the fork. Did anybody hear of SegWit 2x? All right, Bitcoin Cash. So what was going to happen was, Bitcoin's traveling along, a bunch of miners got together, and the developers are going, this is too slow. We want to make it faster. We want to make more money, because $250,000 every 10 minutes isn't enough. All right, so they come up with this plan called segregated witness. So the idea was you could make the transactions faster and it would take less processing time to do the mining. And then, so there was all these rumors going on that the big miners were getting behind this fork. And so people were worried about Bitcoin, but then they're going, oh, cool, there's going to be a fork, so I get twice as many, all right? So people were buying into Bitcoin thinking that they're going to get this SegWit 2x, which was going to be called BTX. And then there was these rumors that this SegWit 2x mob were going to try and take over the BTC moniker, which is the Bitcoin one, and become the real Bitcoin and say it was an upgrade rather than a fork. So there's all this FUD, right? It's crazy. It literally, like when I say it's the wild, wild west, it literally is, right? You better bring your guns or you'll get shot. But there are some good resources around. Literally what you need to do is get a group of friends who are interested and work together. You literally can't do it by yourself. There's not enough time in the day. Yeah, so get some friends who are interested. Like I've got a bunch of crazy friends who are commerce masters and all this kind of stuff who are really into currency trading and things like that, so I'm working with them. But yeah, you literally need help.
There are no more questions. Can we just run applause?
Thank you.